Hello everyone, welcome to
Trying
my
to have another
channel.
look with a steady hand. It's a fun market.
I'm Chloe, I'm 28, and I'm staring at photos my sister just texted me of her moving into what she thinks is my apartment. She's been there for exactly 2 hours, and she's already rearranged my furniture to make room for what appears to be a pack and play. The message that came with the photos was simple. You've been selfish long enough. Time to contribute. We're moving in for a few months. No question mark. No, would it be okay if, or can we discuss this? Just a declaration that my space was now theirs. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt completely invisible in your own family. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. The thing is, I've been called selfish my entire life. It started when I was 12 and refused to give Rebecca my birthday money to buy cigarettes. Apparently, wanting to keep my own gift was selfish. When I was 16 and wouldn't let her borrow my car to go to parties, that was selfish too. When I graduated college and got my own apartment instead of moving back home to help with bills, well, you can guess what that was called. But here's what my family never understood. I wasn't being selfish. I was being smart. Because every time I said yes to Rebecca, every time I bent over backward to help her, she needed more. It was never enough. Give her $50, she'd need $100 next week. Let her stay just one night, and she'd still be on my couch 6 weeks later, eating my food and using my Netflix password. The pattern was always the same. Rebecca would create a crisis, real or manufactured, and the family would rally around her because she was the older one, the one with kids, the one who couldn't catch a break. Meanwhile, I was the reliable one, the one who always had her life together, the one who could afford to sacrifice a little more. Except I was 28 years old and tired of being my sister's backup plan. I'm currently on a business trip in Seattle, 3 time zones away from this particular disaster. My company sent me here for a month-long consulting project. And honestly, the distance from family drama was an unexpected bonus. Until now. Rebecca's 11-year-old son Jordan and 9-year-old daughter Mia had been good kids once, back when they occasionally heard the word no. But years of Rebecca's children should express themselves freely. Parenting had turned them into miniature versions of their mother, entitled, boundary-free, and convinced that other people's belongings were community property. My phone rings. Mom. I let it go to voicemail, but she calls again immediately. And again. By the 4th call, I answer. Chloe, thank goodness. Her voice is breathless with relief. Rebecca told us what happened. That poor girl having to use her emergency key because you wouldn't answer her calls. Emergency key. That's an interesting way to describe using the spare key I'd left with my neighbor for actual emergencies. Though I suppose this qualified as an emergency in Rebecca's mind. The emergency of needing somewhere to live after her latest boyfriend Derek kicked her out. Mom, she can't just move into my apartment without asking. Oh, honey, she did ask. She texted you 3 times yesterday. I scroll through my messages. One text, sent at 2 in the morning. Need place to stay, kids to, DX. That wasn't asking, that was informing. She has the kids with her. Mom continues as if that explains everything. You know how hard it's been for her since the divorce. And now, with Derek being such a disappointment. Derek being such a disappointment. That was Mom's way of saying Rebecca's latest live-in boyfriend had finally gotten tired of supporting someone else's children and paying for someone else's mistakes. Mom, I'm 3,000 miles away. Even if I wanted to help, I couldn't just... You could come home early. This is family, Chloe. Family comes first. There it was. The magic phrase that was supposed to make me drop everything and fix Rebecca's life. Again. But here's what Mom didn't know. What none of them knew. I wasn't coming home to that apartment. I'd moved out 3 weeks ago. Before this trip. The lease had ended. I'd found a better place across town. And I'd been quietly setting up my new life without fanfare or family meetings. I hadn't told them about the move because I knew exactly what would happen. There would be a family discussion about how I should have considered Rebecca's needs. There would be guilt trips about abandoning my family. There would be expectations that I should have coordinated my life choices with Rebecca's perpetual housing crisis. So I'd simply not mentioned it. I need to go, Mom. I'm late for a meeting. Chloe, you can't just... I hung up and immediately called my former landlord. Mr. Peterson was a sweet older man who'd been managing properties for 40 years. When I explained the situation, his response was immediate. Oh dear, I already rented it to someone else. They moved in yesterday. Of course they did. Because that's what happens when you legally end a lease and move out. Someone else moves in. Who's the new tenant? Nice fellow. Federal police officer. Very quiet. Very neat. Said he specifically wanted a place where he could have some peace after work. A federal police officer. Someone who probably didn't appreciate finding strangers in his legally rented apartment. I thanked Mr. Peterson and hung up, staring out the hotel window at the Seattle skyline. My sister was currently setting up house in someone else's home, making coffee in someone else's kitchen, probably letting Jordan and Mia run around like they owned the place. And when that very neat, very quiet federal police officer came home from his shift tonight, he was going to find a woman who claimed family rights to a place that wasn't hers, with children who'd never been taught that other people's property wasn't their playground. My phone buzzed with another text from Rebecca. Thanks for sharing your space. Kids love their new room. Their new room. She'd already claimed space, assigned bedrooms, settled in for what she clearly expected to be a long-term arrangement. I turned off my phone and ordered room service. Tomorrow was going to be very interesting for my family, but for tonight, I was going to enjoy my last few hours of peace before the storm hit. The storm hit at exactly 6:47 the next morning, Seattle time. My phone exploded with notifications, 17 missed calls and 43 text messages from various family members, each more frantic than the last. Rebecca, 6:47 a.m. Some guy is banging on the door saying this is his apartment. Mom, 6:52 a.m. Rebecca called crying. What's happening? Dad, 7:15 a.m. Call us now. Rebecca, 7:18 a.m. This maniac is threatening to call police if we don't leave immediately. Where are you? I ordered coffee and scrolled through them like reading a really dramatic soap opera script, except this one starred my family and their complete inability to grasp cause and effect. According to Rebecca's increasingly hysterical messages, the very neat, very quiet police officer had returned from his night shift to find my sister's belongings in his living room and my niece's toys scattered across his floor. Apparently, he'd been completely unreasonable about the whole thing. Imagine that. A man being unreasonable about finding strangers in his home. The messages escalated throughout the morning. The police officer, Officer Martinez, according to Rebecca's texts, had been extremely rude about asking them to leave immediately. He'd overreacted to finding Jordan bouncing a basketball in the living room at 7 a.m. He was being totally inflexible about Rebecca's explanation that this was a family emergency. I called my mom around 10, after I'd had sufficient caffeine to deal with whatever fresh drama was brewing. Chloe! Mom's voice was sharp with panic. Rebecca says some man is trying to throw her and the children out on the street. She says you gave her permission to stay in your apartment. I never gave her permission to do anything. Well, she has the key. The emergency key. For emergencies. Getting kicked out by your boyfriend isn't my emergency to solve. A pause. Then, in that tone Mom uses when she's about to deploy emotional warfare. These are your niece and nephew we're talking about. Children, Chloe. You'd really let children be homeless? And there it was. The nuclear option. The think of the children card that was supposed to make me crumble. Because in my family's logic, any boundary I set was automatically cruel to children. Those children have a mother who made choices that led to this situation, and they have grandparents with a spare bedroom. Another pause. Longer this time. Our spare bedroom isn't big enough for all three of them. Then Rebecca can figure out alternative arrangements, like adults do. Chloe Elizabeth Morrison, I cannot believe how cold you're being about this. After everything this family has done for you, I hung up, because that sentence never ended anywhere good, and I was tired of hearing the itemized list of my family's sacrifices. My phone rang again immediately. Dad this time. Your mother is beside herself, he said without preamble. What's this nonsense about not living in your apartment anymore? It's not nonsense. I moved out 3 weeks ago. The lease ended. You moved out? Without telling us? The genuine shock in his voice almost made me laugh, because when had I ever made a major life decision without a family committee meeting to discuss how it would affect Rebecca? I found a better place, closer to work. Well, that's... He was struggling now, trying to process this information. That's fine. But you should have told Rebecca you were moving. She wouldn't have gone there if she'd known. Dad, she went there because she assumed I'd drop everything to solve her housing problem. Again, she's your sister. I know who she is. A long silence. Then, what do you want us to do here, Chloe? That police officer is being very aggressive about this whole thing. Police officer. So they knew what the new tenant did for a living. That somehow made this even more ridiculous. Rebecca had essentially broken into a cop's house and was now surprised that he wasn't being accommodating about it. I want you to tell Rebecca to apologize to the man, pack up her things, and leave. Immediately. And then what? Where is she supposed to go? That's not my problem to solve. Jesus, Chloe. Dad's voice was rough with disappointment. When did you become so heartless? Heartless. There was that word again. There. The one they used whenever I refused to be their solution to the Rebecca problem. I became realistic, Dad. There's a difference. I hung up and turned off my phone. Outside my hotel window, Seattle was gray and drizzly, which seemed appropriate for the day. By evening, The situation had apparently reached a crisis point. When I finally turned my phone back on, I found a voicemail from Mr. Peterson that made my stomach drop. "Chloe, dear, I'm so sorry to bother you, but there's been quite a situation. Your sister is refusing to leave Officer Martinez's apartment, and he's called for backup. I'm afraid if this isn't resolved soon, there might be arrests involved. Could you possibly call Officer Martinez? His number is arrests." Rebecca was about to be arrested for trespassing in a police officer's apartment. I immediately called the number Mr. Peterson had given me. "Officer Martinez." His voice was professional but strained. "But this is Chloe Morrison, Rebecca Morrison's sister. Mr. Peterson gave me your number. Ms. Morrison, thank God. Your sister is claiming she has permission to be in this apartment, and she's refusing to leave despite my repeated requests." I could hear voices in the background. Rebecca's voice, getting higher and more emotional, and what sounded like other officers. "Officer Martinez, I need to explain the situation. Rebecca didn't know I'd moved out. She was using an emergency key that was never meant for this purpose. So she doesn't have permission to be here?" "Absolutely not. She never did. She assumed my apartment was available for her use without asking me first." A pause. "Are you saying this was a misunderstanding rather than intentional trespassing?" I closed my eyes. This was my choice point. I could let Rebecca face the consequences of her actions. Arrest, criminal charges, a record that would follow her forever. Or I could intervene one more time, give her an escape route from consequences she'd earned. "It was a misunderstanding," I said. "She genuinely didn't know I'd moved out. She thought she was using my apartment with implied permission." "I see. And the children? Are innocent in this situation. They're just following their mother's lead." Another pause. Then, "Ms. Morrison, if you can guarantee that your sister will leave immediately and won't return, I'm willing to treat this as a misunderstanding rather than pursue charges." Relief flooded through me. "She'll leave, I guarantee it. There is the matter of damages to the property. The locks need to be changed, and there's been some damage to the flooring." "How much?" "Approximately $800. $800. The price of Rebecca's latest crisis, now my responsibility to resolve. I'll take care of it. Thank you, Ms. Morrison. Your intervention here likely saved your sister from a very serious legal situation." After I hung up, I sat in my hotel room and realized what had just happened. I'd saved Rebecca from arrest, but I hadn't saved her from consequences. She still had to leave. She still had nowhere to go. She still had to face the reality that her choices had led to this crisis. And for the first time, I'd helped her while maintaining my boundaries. I'd intervened to prevent disaster without enabling her behavior. It felt like progress. Small progress, but progress nonetheless. The next few days brought the predictable aftermath of the apartment crisis. Rebecca and the kids had moved in with my parents, the solution that had always been available but somehow hadn't been considered while I was being pressured to sacrifice my space. The calls from my family painted a picture I'd seen before. Rebecca positioning herself as the victim of circumstances beyond her control, my parents rallying around her, and everyone carefully avoiding any discussion of how the situation could have been prevented. "She's been through such a traumatic experience," Mom explained during one of her check-in calls. "That police officer was so intimidating, and the children were terrified." Traumatic experience. Rebecca's trespassing had been reframed as something that happened to her rather than something she chose to do. How are Jordan and Mia adjusting to Grandma and Grandpa's house? Well, they're excited to be here, of course. But it's been an adjustment. Our house isn't really set up for children. Their house wasn't set up for children because they'd raised their children 30 years ago and had spent the last 2 decades creating a peaceful retirement environment. Now they were dealing with the reality of active kids in a space designed for quiet adults. And Rebecca? How is she doing with the transition? A pause. "She's processing everything. She feels terrible about the misunderstanding with your apartment." Misunderstanding. Even now, Rebecca's deliberate choice to move into my space without permission was being repackaged as an innocent mistake. Has she started looking for her own place? She's exploring options, but you know how difficult the housing market is right now. And with the children's needs to consider, the children's needs, Rebecca's universal excuse for why normal adult responsibilities didn't apply to her situation. 3 weeks into their stay at my parents' house, Dad called with a tone I'd never heard before. "Chloe, we need to talk. What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong exactly, it's just, this living arrangement is more challenging than we anticipated." Challenging. Dad's diplomatic way of saying Rebecca was driving them insane. "What kind of challenges?" A long pause. "Jordan broke my trophy case yesterday playing basketball in the living room." The trophy case. Dad's pride and joy, filled with awards from his construction company and his amateur golf tournaments. The glass case he'd spent hours organizing and cleaning every weekend for as long as I could remember. How did that happen? Rebecca said the children needed space to exercise since they can't play outside unsupervised in our neighborhood. Their neighborhood. The quiet suburban street where they'd moved specifically because it was filled with retirees and empty nesters. Where lawns were pristine and noise ordinances were taken seriously. What did she say when you talked to her about supervising them? She said children need freedom to explore their environment, that too many rules stifle creativity. Rules stifle creativity. Rebecca's universal response to any suggestion that her children should respect other people's property or space. And Mom? How is she handling the adjustment? Another pause. Your mother is struggling. Mia decided to give herself a haircut yesterday, with Mom's sewing scissors. In the living room, I winced, picturing the scene. Mom's pristine white carpet, probably now decorated with chunks of 9-year-old hair. Where was Rebecca during this? On the phone with Derek, trying to convince him to take her back. She said she couldn't be interrupted during an important conversation. Of course she was, because in Rebecca's mind, managing her romantic crisis took priority over supervising her children's destructive tendency. Have you ever experienced that moment when someone else finally understands what you've been dealing with all along? Drop a comment below if you've ever felt vindicated when reality caught up with family denial. Dad, how long is this arrangement supposed to last? That's what I'm calling about. Rebecca says she needs at least 6 months to find the right place for the children. Somewhere with good schools, a yard, reasonable rent. 6 months. Rebecca's criteria for acceptable housing, affordable rent in a perfect neighborhood with ideal schools, was completely disconnected from market reality. What's her budget? She says she can afford about $800 a month. $800 a month for a place with a yard in a good school district. Rebecca was looking for housing that didn't exist at her price point, which meant she was planning to stay with my parents indefinitely while maintaining the fiction of actively searching. Dad, are you asking me for advice or for help? I'm asking if you think there are options we haven't considered. Options they hadn't considered. Dad was too polite to directly ask me to resume solving Rebecca's problems, but the implication was clear. There are always options. Rebecca could lower her housing expectations, get a second job to afford better places, or work out something with Derek. She's choosing not to pursue those options because staying with you is easier. But the children's stability suffers more from inconsistent boundaries and no consequences than from living in a smaller apartment or changing schools. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if Dad was processing this perspective for the first time. Chloe, can I ask you something honestly? Of course. Did you know it would be like this when you refused to let her stay in your apartment? The question caught me off guard. Not a request for money or intervention, just curiosity about whether I'd anticipated this exact scenario. Yes, I said simply. I did. How? Because I've been dealing with Rebecca's chaos for 28 years. I know how she operates when she doesn't get her first choice. Another long pause. We thought you were being selfish. I know you did. We were wrong, weren't we? It was the first time either of my parents had questioned their handling of the Rebecca situation. The first crack in their united front of family loyalty above all else. You made the choice you thought was right at the time, based on the information you had. But you knew better. I knew Rebecca better. And we didn't listen. It wasn't really a question, more of a realization spoken out loud. That night, I sat in my peaceful apartment, my secret apartment that my family still didn't know about, and felt something I hadn't expected: sympathy for my parents. They were learning what I'd known for years, that enabling Rebecca's irresponsibility didn't help anyone, including Rebecca. They were discovering that good intentions and family loyalty couldn't substitute for boundaries and consequences. But they were learning it the hard way, by living with the daily reality of choices they'd always defended from a safe distance. Part of me felt vindicated. Part of me felt sad for the disillusionment they were experiencing. And part of me wondered if this crisis might finally motivate some real changes in our family dynamics. Only time would tell if they'd learn from this experience, or simply endure it until they could find someone else to manage the Rebecca situation. 6 weeks into Rebecca's stay at my parents' house, Mom called me crying. Chloe, I don't know what to do anymore. Mom never cried during phone calls. She was the family diplomat, the one who maintained composure during crises and found silver linings in impossible situations. What happened? I came home from grocery shopping yesterday and found Jordan had put a basketball through the dining room chandelier. The crystal one. The dining room chandelier. The one Mom had saved for months to buy. The one she cleaned carefully every spring and protected like a family heirloom. Where was Rebecca? In her room with the door closed. She said she had a headache and needed quiet time. Quiet time. While her son destroyed my parents' home. What did she say when you showed her the chandelier? That boys will be boys. And we should be grateful he's getting exercise instead of sitting in front of screens all day. Boys will be boys. Rebecca's universal excuse for Jordan's destructive behavior, the same phrase she'd used when he'd broken my laptop, scratched my car, and helped himself to money from my purse. Mom, where are you calling from? Linda's house. I'm staying with your aunt for a few days. Mom had fled to her sister's house. The same mom who'd spent years lecturing me about family loyalty and sticking together through difficult times had reached her breaking point. How did Dad react when you left? He said he understood, but that I was abandoning the family during a difficult time. Abandoning the family. The same phrase they'd used when I'd refused to solve Rebecca's housing crisis. What was the final straw? A long pause. Yesterday morning, Mia painted a mural on my bathroom wall. When I asked Rebecca about it, she said I was being too rigid about material possessions and that children need to express their creativity. Too rigid about material possessions. Rebecca's way of saying that other people's belongings didn't matter as much as her children's self-expression. Mom, what do you want from me? I want to know if you saw this coming. If you knew it would be like this. Yes, I did. Why didn't you warn us? Would you have believed me? Silence. We both knew the answer. 2 months ago, any attempt to warn them would have been dismissed as more evidence of my heartless attitude toward family. The house is destroyed, she said quietly. 20 years of maintaining this place and it looks like a tornado hit it. What does Rebecca say about the damage? That these are normal childhood accidents and we shouldn't make the children feel guilty about being children. Normal childhood accidents. As if teaching children to respect other people's property would somehow damage their psychological development. How much longer is this supposed to last? Rebecca says she's still looking, but every place she finds has problems. Too expensive, wrong neighborhood, not suitable for children. Too expensive, wrong neighborhood, not suitable for children. Rebecca's criteria ensured she'd never find anything, which meant she could stay with my parents indefinitely while maintaining the fiction of actively searching. Mom, has anyone suggested that Rebecca's standards might be unrealistic for her budget? Your father tried to talk to her about it. She said we were trying to force her and the children into substandard housing because we don't want them around. Don't want them around. Rebecca had managed to reframe reasonable suggestions as evidence of family rejection. Is Dad managing okay? A bitter laugh. Your father is 73 years old. He retired to read books and work in his garden. Instead, he's refereeing arguments between Jordan and Mia, cleaning up messes faster than he can fix them, and listening to Rebecca complain that we don't have the right snacks for the children. The exhaustion in Mom's voice was profound. This wasn't just temporary adjustment stress. This was a woman who'd reached the end of her capacity to cope with chaos. Mom, do you want my advice? Yes, please. Tell Rebecca she has 30 days to find her own place, regardless of whether it meets all her criteria. If she refuses, tell her you'll help her pack, but she needs to leave anyway. We can't throw our daughter and grandchildren out on the street. You're not throwing them out on the street. You're enforcing reasonable boundaries in your own home. Rebecca has options. She's choosing not to pursue them because staying with you is easier. What if she really has nowhere else to go? Then she'll figure something out like other single mothers do when they need housing. The key is that figuring it out becomes her responsibility, not yours. A long pause. What about the children? The children will benefit more from seeing their mother take responsibility for providing stable housing than from learning that other people will always solve their problems. Chloe, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think we failed as parents? With Rebecca? The question was so vulnerable, so different from Mom's usual defensive stance about family dynamics, that I had to consider my answer carefully. I think you loved her and tried to protect her, but I think you protected her from consequences that would have taught her important lessons about responsibility. And now she's 31 and doesn't know how to solve her own problems. She knows how. She's just learned that creating crises gets other people to solve them for her. What about you? Did we fail you too? I thought about all the times I'd been called selfish for wanting boundaries, criticized for not being more giving, made to feel guilty for prioritizing my own needs. You taught me to be self-reliant. That turned out to be a gift, even if it didn't feel like one at the time. After we hung up, I realized something had fundamentally shifted in my family dynamic. For the first time, my parents were questioning their approach to Rebecca rather than my response to Rebecca. They were living with the consequences of choices they'd always defended, and those consequences were destroying their peace, their home, and their marriage. Maybe this crisis would finally motivate some real changes, or maybe they'd just endure it until they could find someone else to manage the Rebecca situation. Either way, it was no longer my emergency to solve. The family intervention came exactly 2 weeks later, disguised as a dinner invitation. Just something casual, Mom said when she called from Aunt Linda's house. Rebecca really wants to clear the air between you two. Rebecca really wants. The phrasing was significant because it meant Rebecca had convinced my parents that family reconciliation was her top priority, rather than avoiding responsibility for the chaos she'd created. What's the agenda for this dinner? No agenda, honey. Just family time. A chance for everyone to reset and start fresh. Reset and start fresh. Mom's favorite solution to complicated problems. Pretend the past didn't happen and move forward with collective amnesia about previous conflicts. Where is this dinner happening? Our house, of course. Rebecca thought it would be nice to cook for everyone. Rebecca cooking. That was almost funny considering Rebecca's culinary skills extended to heating up frozen dinners and ordering takeout. Who else will be there? Just us. You, me, your father, Rebecca, and the children. A small, intimate gathering where I'd be significantly outnumbered by people who'd spent months convinced that my refusal to enable Rebecca's behavior was the root cause of all family problems. Mom, what exactly does Rebecca want to clear the air about? The whole situation with Officer Martinez and the apartment. She feels terrible about how everything got so complicated. Even Mom's language had adapted to Rebecca's narrative, transforming deliberate choices into unfortunate circumstances. And what does she want from me? A pause. She was hoping you might consider helping with the costs from Officer Martinez's apartment. As a gesture of good faith, there it was. The real agenda hiding behind family dinner and heartfelt reconciliation. Rebecca wanted me to pay for the consequences of her choices. How much are we talking about? $800. For the new locks and cleaning. $800. The price of Rebecca's trespassing, now presented as my opportunity to demonstrate family loyalty. Mom, Rebecca caused those damages. Why would I pay for them? Because you're the only one who can afford it right now. And because it would show Rebecca that you care more about family than about being right. Being right. My insistence on basic accountability had been redefined as stubborn pride that I needed to overcome for the sake of family unity. What has Rebecca contributed toward these costs? A pause. She's been looking for additional work, but with the children's schedules, so nothing. Rebecca had contributed nothing toward fixing the problems she'd created, but I was expected to cover the entire cost. I'll think about it. Chloe, please just come to dinner. Let Rebecca apologize properly. Give her a chance to make things right. Make things right by having me pay for her mistakes while she took credit for rebuilding family relationships. That Sunday, I drove to my parents' house for the first time in months. The neighborhood looked the same, but the house itself showed signs of its new residents. The front lawn was scattered with toys. The driveway had chalk drawings that hadn't been cleaned off. Inside was worse. The living room furniture had been rearranged around a large television. The walls showed scuff marks and small holes. The pristine environment my parents had maintained for decades had been transformed into something that looked like a daycare center. After a particularly energetic day, Rebecca greeted me at the door wearing an apron and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Chloe, I'm so glad you came. I made your favorite, pot roast. Pot roast wasn't my favorite, but it was probably the most complicated dish Rebecca knew how to make. Thanks for cooking. Of course. Family dinners are so important, don't you think? Jordan and Mia appeared from the den, both looking more subdued than usual. Hey, Aunt Chloe, Jordan said quietly. Hi, Jordan. How's school going? Fine. He glanced at his mother before adding, we might have to change schools again if we move. Move again. Apparently, Rebecca's housing search was still ongoing, despite having been with my parents for over 2 months. Where are you thinking of moving? Rebecca's smile tightened. We're exploring options. I want to find the right environment for the children's development. Dinner was exactly what I'd expected. An elaborate performance designed to demonstrate Rebecca's transformation into a responsible family member. She served the food with flourishes, kept the conversation light and positive, and made several references to how much she'd learned during this challenging period. It wasn't until dessert that she got to the point. Chloe, I owe you an enormous apology, she said, her voice heavy with practiced sincerity. I realize now that my actions put you in a terrible position. I should have asked permission instead of assuming I could use your apartment. Assuming I could use your apartment? Even her apology managed to minimize the violation of breaking into someone else's home. I appreciate that, Rebecca. I've been thinking about how to make things right, and I'd like to pay you back for any trouble I caused. Pay me back. Interesting phrasing, considering she'd never paid me back for anything in our entire relationship. That's not necessary, but it is. I want to rebuild trust between us. She paused dramatically. I was hoping we could work together on resolving the costs from Officer Martinez's apartment. If you could help with the immediate expenses, I could set up a payment plan to reimburse you over time. There it was. Rebecca wanted an interest-free loan disguised as family solidarity. How much time are we talking about? Maybe 6 months? Once I get settled in my own place and the children's situation stabilizes? 6 months minimum, with built-in excuses for delays and extensions. In Rebecca's world, payment plans were just polite ways of making requests that would never be fulfilled. Rebecca, what happens if I say no? Her composure cracked slightly. Well, I'd have to find another solution. Maybe ask Mom and Dad to take out a loan against the house. Take out a loan against the house. The nuclear option, designed to make me feel guilty about forcing my elderly parents into financial risk. I looked around the table at my family, Mom and Dad watching hopefully, Jordan and Mia eating their ice cream, unaware of the adult manipulation happening around them, Rebecca waiting for my answer with barely concealed anxiety. This was my choice point. Resume my old role as Rebecca's problem solver, or maintain the boundaries I'd worked so hard to establish. I need to think about it, I said finally. Rebecca's face fell. Think about it? It's family helping family. It's also enabling behavior that put an innocent man through harassment and stress. I can't believe you're still punishing me for a mistake I've already apologized for. Still punishing. As if my refusal to automatically solve her problems was an act of cruelty rather than basic self-preservation. I'm not punishing anyone, Rebecca. I'm just not automatically saying yes anymore. She turned to our parents. This is exactly what I was afraid of. Chloe has decided she's better than the rest of us. The trap was perfectly laid. Agree that I didn't think I was superior, and by implication, agree to help with Rebecca's latest financial crisis. I think I'm responsible for my own choices and my own consequences, I said, and I think everyone else should be responsible for theirs. I stood up from the table. Thank you for dinner. Rebecca, the pot roast was delicious. As I gathered my purse and coat, Rebecca's voice followed me to the door. I hope you can live with yourself, knowing you chose money over family. Money over family. The final guilt trip, delivered as I walked away from the role they'd assigned me since childhood. But for the first time in my life, I could live with myself, because I'd chosen truth over enabling, boundaries over dysfunction, and that felt like exactly the right choice. 2 weeks later, Dad called me with a proposition that surprised me. Chloe, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Okay, if you were to help with those apartment costs, hypothetically, what would your conditions be? Conditions. Dad had learned something about negotiations from watching this family crisis unfold. Why are you asking hypothetically? A long pause. Because your mother came home yesterday, looked at the state of the house, and went straight back to Linda's without unpacking her bag. Mom had returned, taken one look at whatever fresh chaos had occurred during her absence, and immediately fled again. What happened while she was gone? Rebecca decided the children needed more space for their activities. She rearranged all the furniture, took down some of Mom's wall decorations to hang the kids' artwork, and converted the guest room into what she calls a creativity center. The guest room, Mom's carefully decorated space for visitors, transformed into an art studio for children who'd never been taught boundaries. And Mom's reaction? She didn't say a word, just looked around, picked up her bag, and left. But I found a note on the kitchen counter that said she's not coming back until Rebecca moves out. An ultimatum. Mom had reached her absolute limit. Dad, if I were to pay those costs, my condition would be that Rebecca moves out within 30 days. Silence. She has nowhere to go, he said finally. She has the same options she had 4 months ago when she decided to break into my apartment. She can lower her standards, get additional income, or work something out with Derek. Derek won't take her back. Then she needs to explore other solutions, like adults do when they need housing. A pause. Chloe, I know how this sounds, but could you consider covering her first month's rent somewhere? Just to help her get established? First month's rent. The ask had escalated from $800 to potentially $1,500 or more. Dad, if I pay her first month's rent, what happens when she can't afford the second month? She'll figure it out. Will she? Or will there be another family emergency that requires someone else to solve her problems? The question hung between us because we both knew the answer. What if we put it in writing? Dad asked. Some kind of agreement that this is the last financial help? A contract with Rebecca. The idea was absurd, considering she'd never honored any agreement that became inconvenient. Dad, do you really think a piece of paper would change Rebecca's behavior? Maybe. If she understood this was absolutely the final time. How many times have you told her something was the final time? A long pause. Too many. And how did that work out? Not well. I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. This wasn't about Rebecca anymore. This was about a 73-year-old man trying to save his marriage and his home from the collateral damage of his daughter's dysfunction. If I do this, I said slowly, I need to be clear about what it means. Okay, I pay the apartment costs and first month's rent somewhere else. Total cost around $2,000. Rebecca moves out within 30 days. And this is absolutely the last financial assistance she gets from me. Ever. 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 No more emergencies, no more temporary help, no more family obligations to bail her out. What if something genuinely serious happens? Dad, everything with Rebecca gets framed as genuinely serious, but none of it has been serious enough to motivate her to change her patterns. Another pause. And if she refuses to move out even after you pay for her new place, then you and Mom enforce the boundary. You tell her she has to leave whether she has somewhere else to go or not. Chloe, Dad, you can't ask me to solve Rebecca's housing problem and then refuse to enforce the solution when she finds it inconvenient. Let me talk to your mother. You have 1 week to decide. After that, Rebecca's housing situation becomes something you handle without my involvement. I hung up and sat in my quiet apartment, processing what I'd just agreed to consider. $2,000 to buy my family's peace and my own freedom from future Rebecca emergencies. It felt like paying ransom, except the kidnappers were my own relatives. But maybe it was worth it to finally close the door on 28 years of being my sister's backup plan. The question was whether Rebecca would actually stay gone, or if this was just the latest in a series of family bailouts that would repeat whenever life got challenging. Based on her track record, I wasn't optimistic about her learning capacity, but I was optimistic about my own ability to stick to boundaries once they were clearly established and paid for in advance. Dad called back in less than 24 hours. We accept your conditions. No negotiation, no requests for modifications, no attempts to bargain for better terms. Dad sounded like a man who'd run out of options and patience in equal measure. How did Mom react? She said to tell you she's sorry it took us so long to understand what you've been dealing with all these years. An apology. From Mom. For doubting my assessment of Rebecca's behavior and my need for protective boundaries. And Rebecca? Rebecca is less enthusiastic about the arrangement. I could imagine. Rebecca had probably expected my parents to negotiate on her behalf, to find some middle ground that let her keep the benefits of family support without the inconvenience of actually moving out. What exactly did she say? That 30 days isn't enough time to find a decent place. That rushing into housing decisions under pressure isn't fair to the children. That families should support each other through transitions instead of making ultimatums. Families should support each other. Rebecca's standard response to any situation that required effort or sacrifice from her. Did you explain that this isn't an ultimatum? It's an offer with conditions? I tried. She said the conditions were designed to humiliate her and prove that she's a burden on the family. Humiliate her. Rebecca had managed to reframe her eviction from my parents' house as a personal attack rather than a natural consequence of making their home unlivable. Has she started looking for apartments? She says she has, but every place she's found has problems. Too expensive, wrong neighborhood, not suitable for children. Rebecca's criteria for acceptable housing ensured she'd never find anything, which meant she could stay indefinitely while maintaining the fiction of actively searching. What's her price range? She says she needs at least a 2-bedroom for under $1,000 a month, preferably with a yard. $1,000 a month for a 2-bedroom with a yard. Rebecca's budget expectations were completely disconnected from market reality. Dad, that budget might get her a 1-bedroom efficiency in a less desirable area. I know. I've tried explaining that, but she says she won't sacrifice her children's well-being to meet an arbitrary deadline. Arbitrary deadline. My 30-day requirement had been redefined as cruel and unreasonable. The deadline stands, I said firmly. 30 days from today, or the offer expires. What if she finds a place but needs help with security deposits? Those costs come out of the $2,000. It's not additional money. A pause. Chloe, what if she just refuses to leave? Then you and Mom evict her. Legally, if necessary. We can't throw our daughter out on the street. You're not throwing her out. You're enforcing reasonable boundaries in your own home. Rebecca has options. She's choosing not to pursue them because staying with you is easier. The truth settled between us. Rebecca wasn't helpless. She was simply accustomed to having her problems solved by other people. 3 days later, Rebecca called me herself. Chloe, we need to talk. About what? About these unreasonable conditions you've attached to helping the family. Which conditions do you find unreasonable? The timeline? Mainly. 30 days isn't enough time to make responsible housing decisions. I need at least 2 months to find the right place for the children. 2 months. Rebecca wanted to extend her stay by another 8 weeks while Mom continued hiding at Aunt Linda's. The timeline isn't negotiable. Rebecca, why not? What difference does 30 days versus 2 months make to you? It makes the difference between Mom coming home and Mom filing for separation. A pause. That's ridiculous. Mom wouldn't leave Dad over something like this. Mom has already left Dad over something like this. She's been gone for 3 weeks. That's emotional manipulation. Rich, coming from someone who'd built her life around manipulating family emotions to avoid consequences. Rebecca, I'm offering you $2,000 and 30 days to find housing. That's more generous than anyone else has offered. It's not about the money. Then what is it about? It's about you using this situation to prove you were right about me all along. You want me to fail. I want you to fail. Rebecca's theory was that my boundaries were motivated by vindictiveness. Rebecca, I want you to succeed. I want you to find stable housing and build an independent life. I just want to do it without subsidizing your choices indefinitely. Easy for you to say. You don't have children to consider. And there it was. The ultimate Rebecca defense, claiming that parenthood exempted her from basic adult accountability. Lots of single mothers find housing and support themselves without relying on family bailouts. Not everyone has family willing to help. I thought I did. But apparently I was wrong. The guilt trip was perfectly executed. I was abandoning her children, destroying family bonds, failing basic tests of loyalty. Rebecca, the offer stands until next Friday. Take it or leave it. And if I leave it, then you figure out your housing situation without my involvement. I hung up feeling completely calm about holding firm to the boundaries I'd established. 27 days to go. Rebecca found an apartment on Thursday with 2 days to spare. A 2-bedroom unit in a subsidized housing complex across town. Not the suburban paradise with yards and perfect schools she'd envisioned, but actual housing she could afford on her income. The move happened without ceremony or dramatic farewells. Rebecca packed while maintaining a running commentary about how she was being forced out by unrealistic expectations and insufficient family compassion. I transferred the money as promised. $800 for Officer Martinez's apartment damages, $1,200 for Rebecca's first month's rent and deposit, $2,000 to buy my family's peace and my own freedom from future Rebecca emergencies. Mom returned home the day after Rebecca moved out and spent the weekend assessing the damage. The repair costs were extensive. New carpet throughout the main floor, professional cleaning of all furniture, repairs to walls and doors, replacement of the chandelier and trophy case. The final bill exceeded $4,000. I paid what I'd promised. My parents covered the rest without complaint, which told me exactly how desperate they'd been to reclaim their home. For 2 weeks, the house was quiet. Mom and Dad returned to their retirement routine of reading, gardening, and peaceful dinners together. The toys disappeared from the front lawn. The scuff marks were painted over. The guest room was restored to its original purpose. Then Rebecca called. Chloe, I wanted to thank you for helping me get established in the new place. Thank me. That was unexpected. Rebecca rarely expressed gratitude, especially when it acknowledged someone else's generosity. How are Jordan and Mia adjusting? Really well. Jordan likes his new school, and Mia made friends with the girl next door. That's great to hear. Actually, that's why I'm calling. The kids have been asking about you, wondering when they'll see their aunt again. The kids have been asking. Rebecca's diplomatic way of testing whether my financial assistance had reset our relationship to its previous dynamic. They're welcome to call me anytime. I was thinking more like a visit. Maybe you could come over for dinner this weekend. A dinner invitation. Rebecca was already probing the boundaries of our new arrangement. I'm not available this weekend. What about next weekend? I'll let you know. A pause. Chloe, I feel like there's still tension between us that doesn't need to be there. Tension. Rebecca's word for my refusal to pretend our relationship could simply return to normal. What kind of tension? Like you're still angry about what happened with the apartment situation. The apartment situation. Even now, Rebecca couldn't describe her actions accurately. Trespassing had become a situation. I'm not angry, Rebecca. I'm just not interested in resuming our old patterns. What patterns? The pattern where your emergencies become my obligations, where family loyalty is measured by my willingness to sacrifice my resources for your convenience. That's not fair. I never asked you to sacrifice anything. Never asked me to sacrifice anything. Rebecca had perfected the art of creating crises that required other people's resources while maintaining plausible deniability. Rebecca, do you understand why I needed to set boundaries? Honestly? No. I think you decided you were tired of being part of this family and found excuses to justify pulling away. In Rebecca's mind, my boundaries weren't about self-preservation. They were about rejecting family obligations out of selfishness. I hope things work out well for you in your new place. That's it? That's all you have to say? That's all I have to say. So you're really going to cut me off permanently because I made a mistake? A mistake. Singular. All of it. The trespassing, the destruction of our parents' home, the manipulation, the guilt trips, reduced to one small error in judgment. I'm not cutting you off. I'm just not resuming the role of solving your problems. What if there's a real emergency? Something serious with the kids. Then you'll handle it like other single mothers do, by contacting appropriate resources and making responsible decisions. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if she'd hung up. You've really changed, she said finally. Yes, I have. Not for the better. Maybe not, from her perspective. The old Chloe had been useful to Rebecca. The new Chloe was not. After hanging up, I realized something profound had shifted. For the first time in our relationship, I felt genuine peace about Rebecca's situation. She had stable housing that she was responsible for maintaining. Jordan and Mia had consistent school attendance. Mom and Dad had their home and marriage back. And I had my life back. 3 months later, Mom called with what she described as good news. Rebecca has been doing really well in her apartment. She's kept up with rent, the children seem settled, and she's even talking about taking community college classes. That's great, Mom. She's also been seeing someone. A nice man she met at Jordan's school. He seems very stable, very responsible. A stable, responsible man who presumably didn't yet know that Rebecca expected romantic partners to subsidize her lifestyle and solve her logistical problems. I hope it works out for her. She asked me to tell you that she's sorry about how things got so complicated between you two. An apology delivered through intermediaries. Rebecca's preferred method for expressing regret, without acknowledging specific wrongdoing. I appreciate that. Do you think you might consider having her over for Christmas? The children really miss their aunt. Christmas dinner. Mom was testing whether enough time had passed for me to resume family traditions that included Rebecca. I'll think about it. She's really changed, Chloe. Living independently has been good for her. Maybe it had. Maybe facing real consequences had actually motivated Rebecca to develop coping skills and self-reliance. Or maybe she was simply between crises, enjoying temporary stability before the next emergency that would require family intervention. Either way, it wasn't my problem to solve anymore. A week later, Dad called with different news. Chloe, I wanted to give you a heads up about something. What's going on? Rebecca's new boyfriend broke up with her. She's pretty upset about it. The stable, responsible man had apparently discovered something about Rebecca that made him reconsider the relationship. I'm sorry to hear that. She's been calling your mother every day, crying about how hard it is to date as a single mother. Yesterday, she mentioned that she might not be able to afford rent next month without his help. Without his help. Rebecca had apparently expected her new boyfriend to contribute to her expenses after dating for only 3 months. What did Mom tell her? That she needs to figure out her own finances. But Chloe, I'm worried she might ask you for help. If she does, I'll say no, even if she frames it as an emergency. Especially then. A pause. I have to ask, are you really never going to help her again? No matter what happens? It was the question I'd been expecting. The test of whether my boundaries were real or just temporary leverage in family negotiations. Dad, I'm not going to enable Rebecca's pattern of creating crises and expecting other people to solve them. That's not helping her, and it's not helping the family. But what if something genuinely serious happens? Then Rebecca will learn to handle genuinely serious situations the way other adults do, by making hard choices, accepting help from appropriate resources, and dealing with consequences. You sound so cold when you talk about her. Cold. The word Rebecca had probably used to describe my refusal to resume financial support. I'm not cold, Dad, I'm realistic. Rebecca is 31 years old with a job and a brain. She's capable of managing her own life if she stops expecting other people to do it for her. And if she really can't manage, if she ends up homeless or loses the children, then those consequences might finally motivate her to make different choices. The silence that followed was heavy with Dad's disapproval. I never thought I'd hear you say that about your own sister. 5 years ago, I wouldn't have said it. But 5 years ago, I was still pretending that enabling Rebecca was the same as loving her. After we hung up, I realized this conversation had been inevitable. My family was testing my resolve, seeing if Rebecca's apparent stability had softened my position on boundaries. It hadn't. If anything, Rebecca's brief success in managing her own life proved that she was capable of independence when forced circumstances required it. The fact that she was already positioning her next crisis, the boyfriend breakup, potential rent problems, as family emergencies proved that she hadn't actually learned anything fundamental about personal responsibility. My phone rang an hour later. Rebecca, calling from her own number for the first time in months. Chloe, I really need to talk to you. About what? I'm going through a really difficult time right now. Marcus, my boyfriend, he ended our relationship, and I don't know how I'm going to manage everything alone. Everything alone. Rebecca had dated this man for 3 months and had already become dependent on his financial support. I'm sorry the relationship didn't work out. It's not just that. He was helping me with some expenses, and now I don't know how I'm going to afford rent next month. There it was. The crisis that would require family intervention, right on schedule. What are your options? That's what I'm calling about. I was hoping maybe you could help me just this once, just until I get back on my feet. Just this once. Just until I get back on my feet. The same phrases Rebecca had used dozens of times over the years. Rebecca, I'm not going to help you financially. Even though I might lose my apartment? Even then. What about Jordan and Mia? You'd really let them be homeless? The children card, deployed with perfect timing. Jordan and Mia won't be homeless. You'll figure out a solution because you'll have to. I can't believe you're going to abandon me when I need you most. Abandon her. The language of victimhood, designed to make me feel guilty for maintaining boundaries. I'm not abandoning you, Rebecca. I'm refusing to enable your pattern of financial irresponsibility. This isn't a pattern. This is one emergency. It's the same emergency you've had for 15 years. The only thing that changes is the excuse. I hung up before she could respond. My phone immediately started ringing again. Rebecca, then Mom, then Dad. I let them all go to voicemail. By morning, I had 12 missed calls and 7 voicemails, all variations on the theme that I was being heartless toward my struggling sister. But I also had something I'd never had before: complete confidence that my boundaries were necessary and appropriate. Rebecca would figure out her rent problem because she'd have to. She'd find resources, make hard choices, or face consequences that might finally motivate real changes in her behavior. And for the first time in my adult life, that process would happen without my involvement. It felt like freedom. The calls from my family continued for 3 days, each more desperate than the last. Rebecca's rent was due in a week. She'd exhausted her savings during the relationship with Marcus. She'd applied for emergency assistance, but the waiting list was months long. She was facing eviction and potential homelessness with 2 children. According to the increasingly frantic voicemails, this was different from all her previous crises because the stakes were so much higher. The children's stability was at risk. Rebecca was talking about giving up completely. The family was rallying around her during this genuine emergency. On Thursday, Mom called me at work, crying, "Chloe, please, I'm begging you, just this one time. Mom, we've had this conversation already." Not about this. This is different. Rebecca might lose the children if she becomes homeless. Social services could get involved. Social services. The nuclear threat that was supposed to make me abandon my boundaries and rescue Rebecca from the consequences of her choices. Mom, if Rebecca loses housing, it won't be because I refuse to pay her rent. It will be because she made financial decisions based on someone else's income instead of her own. She didn't know the relationship would end, which is exactly why adults don't become financially dependent on someone they've been dating for 3 months. You're being so cold about this. I'm being realistic about this. A pause. What if we all contributed? Me, your father, maybe your Aunt Linda? If everyone helped a little, then you'd be enabling Rebecca's irresponsibility as a group instead of individually. Chloe, these are your niece and nephew we're talking about. Yes, they are. And the best thing I can do for them is refuse to teach them that other people will always solve their mother's problems. Mom was crying harder now. I can't believe you've become this person. This person. Someone who maintained boundaries instead of constantly sacrificing my resources for other people's poor choices. I've become someone who understands the difference between helping and enabling. I hung up and immediately blocked my parents' numbers for the rest of the day. I needed space to think without constant emotional manipulation. That evening, I unblocked their numbers to find 14 missed calls and a text from Dad that said simply, "Call me, it's important." When I called back, Dad sounded exhausted. Rebecca called in a panic tonight. She says she has to be out of the apartment by Sunday or face eviction proceedings. Okay? Okay? That's all you have to say? Dad, what do you want me to say? Rebecca created this crisis by making poor financial decisions. Now she gets to solve it. And if she can't solve it, then she experiences the consequences of those poor decisions. Maybe those consequences will motivate better choices in the future. A long pause. Your mother wants to give her the money. That's Mom's choice. We don't have $1,500 in our emergency fund. Then she can't give Rebecca $1,500. She's talking about taking out a second mortgage on the house. A second mortgage. Mom was willing to put their retirement security at risk, rather than let Rebecca face consequences for her choices. Dad, that's a terrible idea. I know it's a terrible idea, but I don't know how to stop her without seeming heartless about the grandchildren. You stop her by pointing out that mortgaging your retirement to pay Rebecca's rent doesn't solve Rebecca's fundamental problem. It just delays the next crisis while creating a new crisis for you and Mom. Will you talk to her? She might listen to you. She won't listen to me about this. In her mind, I'm the daughter who abandoned the family in their time of greatest need. What do you think we should do? It was the first time Dad had asked for my advice about handling Rebecca rather than asking me to solve Rebecca's problems directly. I think you should tell Rebecca that you don't have the money to help, and that she needs to explore other options. Roommates, moving to a cheaper place, asking Derek for child support, getting a second job. There are solutions that don't require family bailouts. And if she says she's already explored those options, then she explores them harder. Or she faces the consequences of not finding solutions. Another pause. I keep thinking about Jordan and Mia. They didn't ask for any of this. No, they didn't. But they also don't benefit from learning that their mother's irresponsibility will always be rescued by grandparents who sacrifice their own security. When did this become so complicated? It became complicated when we started treating Rebecca's emergencies as family emergencies instead of natural consequences of her choices. After hanging up, I sat in my quiet apartment and tried to imagine what would happen over the weekend. Rebecca would probably spend Friday calling everyone she'd ever known, looking for someone to loan her $1,500. When that failed, she'd spend Saturday crying to Mom about her children becoming homeless. By Sunday, Mom would probably cave and agree to the second mortgage. Or maybe, just maybe, Rebecca would actually solve her own problem. She'd find a roommate, negotiate with her landlord, apply for emergency assistance, or discover resources she'd never bothered to research before. Either way, it wasn't my emergency to solve. On Sunday evening, Dad called with an update. Rebecca found a roommate. She did? Another single mother from Jordan's school. They're going to split the rent and utilities. A roommate. Rebecca had actually solved her own problem through her own efforts. That's great news. It is. Though Rebecca is upset about having to share space with someone else's children. Of course she was. Even when Rebecca solved her own problems, she found reasons to be dissatisfied with solutions that didn't meet her exact preferences. How are Mom and Dad handling this? Your mother is relieved but disappointed that Rebecca didn't come to us for help. Disappointed that Rebecca didn't come to them for help. Mom was actually upset that Rebecca had found independence instead of requiring family intervention. And you? I'm proud of her for figuring it out. And grateful that I don't have to take out a second mortgage. After we hung up, I realized something significant had happened. Rebecca had faced a genuine crisis and solved it without family assistance. She'd been forced to become resourceful, and she discovered that she was capable of finding solutions when bailouts weren't available. It was exactly what I'd hoped would happen when I started maintaining boundaries. Whether Rebecca would remember this lesson during her next crisis remained to be seen, but at least now there was evidence that she could solve her own problems when she had to. The roommate arrangement lasted exactly 6 weeks. Dad called me on a Tuesday morning, his voice tight with frustration. Rebecca's living situation fell apart. She and the roommate had some kind of conflict, and now she's looking for a new place. Some kind of conflict. I could imagine what that meant. Rebecca had probably expected her roommate to accommodate her children's schedule, split utilities unequally, or provide free babysitting services. What happened? Rebecca says the woman was unreasonable about household rules. Apparently, she wanted Rebecca to supervise the children more closely and contribute to cleaning schedules. Supervise the children more closely. Rebecca's roommate had made the mistake of expecting basic parenting and shared household responsibilities. Where is Rebecca staying now? With us. Temporarily. Temporarily. The word that never meant temporarily when it came to Rebecca. Dad, I know what you're thinking, but this really is temporary. Just until she finds another place. How long has she been back? 3 days. And before you ask, yes, the house is chaos again. But your mother and I discussed it, and we can handle a few weeks of inconvenience. A few weeks of inconvenience. Dad was already preparing himself for the long-term reality of Rebecca's return. What's her housing budget this time? She says she learned her lesson about depending on roommates. She wants her own place. Something stable for the children. Her own place. Rebecca had somehow concluded that the problem with her previous arrangement was sharing space rather than her inability to respect other people's boundaries. And her budget for this own place? A pause. She's looking at places around $1,200 a month. $1,200 a month. Rebecca's budget had increased by 50% since her last housing search, despite having no increase in income. Dad, how is she planning to afford $1,200 a month? She says she's been doing some freelance work on the side. Some freelance work. Rebecca's mysterious additional income that would somehow cover the difference between her previous $800 budget and her new $1,200 expectations. What kind of freelance work? I'm not entirely sure. Something with social media marketing. Social media marketing. Rebecca had probably made $50 helping someone set up an Instagram account and had convinced herself this was a sustainable income stream. Dad, you know where this is going, right? Where what is going? Rebecca is going to spend a few weeks looking at apartments she can't afford, declare that the housing market is impossible, and settle in for an extended stay while she figures things out. She promised this would be temporary. She promises a lot of things. A pause. Chloe, I need to ask you something. What? Are you ever going to forgive Rebecca? Are you ever going to be willing to have a relationship with your sister again? The question caught me off guard. Not because I hadn't thought about it, but because I'd assumed my family understood that I wasn't holding grudges or harboring resentment. Dad, I'm not angry with Rebecca. I just don't want to resume the role of solving her problems. But you won't even see her. You won't have dinner with the family. You won't visit when she's here. Because every family gathering becomes an opportunity for her to create a new crisis that requires my involvement. What if she promised not to ask you for help? She's made that promise before. What if we promised to make sure she didn't ask you for help? I almost laughed. My parents, who had never successfully prevented Rebecca from manipulating family dynamics, were going to suddenly become effective boundary enforcers. Dad, I have a relationship with Rebecca. It's a relationship where I'm polite when we interact, supportive of her genuine successes, and unavailable for financial emergencies. That's not punishment or resentment. That's just healthy boundaries. It doesn't feel like a relationship. It doesn't feel like the old relationship where Rebecca's needs determined everyone else's choices. You're right about that. Another pause. Your mother misses you. Mom is welcome to have a relationship with me that doesn't revolve around managing Rebecca's crises. But family dinners, holidays, are occasions when Rebecca typically creates drama that requires someone to fix something. I'm not interested in being the designated fixer anymore. So you're really going to miss Jordan and Mia growing up because of your issues with Rebecca? Issues with Rebecca. Dad had reframed my boundaries as personal conflicts that I needed to overcome for the sake of family harmony. I'm not missing anything, Dad. Jordan and Mia are welcome to call me anytime. They're welcome to spend time with me without Rebecca present. They're welcome to have a relationship with their aunt that isn't mediated through their mother's latest crisis. Rebecca would never agree to that. Then Rebecca is prioritizing her own convenience over her children's relationship with their extended family. The conversation ended with both of us frustrated. Dad wanted me to pretend that our family dynamics could return to normal. I wanted him to understand that normal had been dysfunctional. 2 hours later, Rebecca called me directly. Chloe, we need to have a conversation about this family situation. What situation? The situation where you've completely cut yourself off from your niece and nephew because of some imaginary grievance against me. Imaginary grievance. Rebecca had managed to redefine months of boundary violations, financial manipulation, and emotional blackmail as conflicts that existed only in my mind. I haven't cut myself off from anyone, Rebecca. You refuse to come to family events. You won't visit when I'm at Mom and Dad's house. You act like I'm some kind of dangerous person the children need to be protected from. I act like you're someone who creates crises that require other people to solve them, because that's exactly what you do. That's not fair. Which part? All of it. I haven't asked you for anything in months, because I made it clear I wouldn't provide anything. That's not the same as not needing help. So you admit you're punishing me. I'm maintaining boundaries that protect my peace of mind and discourage your dependence on family bailouts. My dependence? I've been completely independent since I moved into my own place. For 6 weeks. Until the roommate situation became inconvenient and you moved back in with Mom and Dad. That's temporary. Rebecca, everything with you is always temporary until it becomes permanent. You're back in your old room, the kids are disrupting Mom and Dad's routine again, and you're looking at apartments you can't afford while waiting for someone else to solve your housing problem. I'm not waiting for anyone to solve anything. Then why are you living with our elderly parents instead of in a place you can actually afford? Silence. Rebecca, I don't hate you. I'm not angry with you. I just refuse to participate in the family dynamic where your emergencies become everyone else's obligations. And if a real emergency happens, something serious with the kids or my health, then you'll handle it the way other adults handle emergencies, by making hard choices and using appropriate resources. You really have changed. Yes, I have. I've learned the difference between being helpful and being used. And you think I was using you? I think you were using all of us. And we were letting you because we confused enabling with love. I hung up, knowing that conversation would be reported to my parents as evidence of my cold, unforgiving attitude toward family. But for the first time, I'd been able to articulate exactly why my boundaries existed and why they needed to remain in place. Rebecca wasn't evil or malicious. She was someone who'd learned that creating crises got other people to solve her problems, and she'd never been forced to develop alternative coping strategies. Until she was forced to develop those strategies, she'd continue creating crises. And until my family stopped responding to those crises with bailouts, the pattern would continue indefinitely. 6 months later, Rebecca was still living with my parents. The temporary stay had become permanent, just as I'd predicted. Mom had stopped mentioning end dates for the arrangement. Dad had stopped pretending he was enjoying his retirement. The calls from my family had become less frequent, but more intense. Christmas dinner invitations that came with guilt trips about missing family traditions. Easter brunches that were framed as opportunities to repair damaged relationships. Birthday parties for Jordan and Mia that included lectures about the importance of family unity. I declined them all politely and consistently. Then Mom called with news that surprised me. Rebecca is engaged. Engaged? To a man named Kevin. She met him at her work. He seems very nice, very stable, very stable. The same description they'd used for Marcus, the boyfriend who'd lasted 3 months before discovering that dating Rebecca meant subsidizing her entire lifestyle. How long have they been dating? About 2 months, but Rebecca says when you know, 2 months. Rebecca had gotten engaged to someone after 2 months, having learned nothing from her previous relationship disaster. When is the wedding? This summer. Kevin is eager to start building a life together. Kevin was eager to start building a life together with a woman who lived with her parents and had never successfully maintained independent housing. I hope it works out for her. She wanted me to ask if you'd be willing to be in the wedding party. The wedding party. Rebecca wanted me to participate in celebrating her marriage to a man she'd known for 8 weeks. Mom, I'm not going to be in Rebecca's wedding. She's your only sister. And she's marrying someone she barely knows after a pattern of financial irresponsibility and relationship dysfunction. This isn't something I want to celebrate. You're being very judgmental. I'm being realistic about patterns. What if this time is different? What if Kevin is the person who helps Rebecca finally get her life together? What if this time is different? The question my family had been asking about Rebecca for 20 years, despite overwhelming evidence that this time was always the same as last time. Mom, if Rebecca gets her life together, I'll be genuinely happy for her. But I'm not going to participate in another dramatic gesture that's likely to end in crisis. She really wants you there. She really wants family validation for her choices. That's different from wanting me there. 2 weeks later, Dad called with different news. The engagement is off. What happened? Kevin broke up with her. Apparently, he realized she was expecting him to solve her housing situation and support her children financially. Kevin had figured out what Marcus had figured out. That dating Rebecca meant becoming responsible for problems he hadn't created. How is Rebecca handling it? Not well. She's been crying for 3 days, saying she'll never find anyone who understands her situation. Her situation. Rebecca's euphemism for the chaos she created through poor decisions and boundary violations. And the housing situation? That's actually why I'm calling. Rebecca says she can't afford to move out now that Kevin isn't going to help with expenses. She's talking about staying with us permanently. Permanently. Rebecca had finally abandoned the pretense that her living arrangement was temporary. What did you and Mom say? We said we needed to think about it. Dad, you've been thinking about it for 6 months while Rebecca lived in your house without contributing to expenses or helping with household responsibilities. I know, but what are our options? We can't throw her out. You can tell her she has 60 days to find alternative arrangements. You can help her research affordable housing options and social services. You can make it clear that permanent residency isn't available. And if she can't find anything, then she finds something anyway because she'll have to. A pause. I think your mother is going to have another breakdown if this continues much longer. Another breakdown. Mom was approaching her limit again, just as she had during Rebecca's first extended stay. Then you have a choice to make, Dad. You can enable Rebecca's dependence and watch it destroy Mom's mental health, or you can enforce boundaries and help Rebecca develop independence. It's not that simple. Yes, it is. You just don't want to accept that it's that simple. 3 days later, I got a call from Rebecca that I'd been expecting for months. Chloe, I need to talk to you about something important. What's that? I've been doing a lot of thinking about our relationship, and I realized that I owe you a huge apology. An apology. Rebecca was finally ready to acknowledge responsibility for the family chaos she'd created. For what specifically? For taking advantage of your generosity over the years. For not appreciating everything you did for me and the children. For not respecting your boundaries when you tried to set them. It was the most comprehensive acknowledgement of responsibility I'd ever heard from Rebecca. I appreciate that. I've been going to counseling, trying to understand why my relationships keep falling apart. My therapist has helped me see some patterns in my behavior that I need to change. Counseling. Rebecca was actually getting professional help for her dysfunction. That's great. Rebecca, I'm proud of you for taking that step. Part of my recovery involves making amends to people I've hurt. I know I hurt you, and I know I damaged our family relationships. Making amends. Rebecca was working through some kind of 12-step program for her various dependencies. What does making amends look like to you? I want to rebuild our relationship slowly. I know I need to earn back your trust. I'm not asking for money or help with anything. I just want the chance to show you that I'm changing. Not asking for money or help with anything. Rebecca was actually offering to work on our relationship without any financial agenda. Rebecca, what are you asking from me specifically? Would you be willing to have coffee with me? Just us, no kids, no family pressure. I want to talk about how to rebuild our relationship in a healthier way. Coffee. A small, low-stakes interaction that didn't involve family obligations or financial requests. I'd be willing to do that. Really? Really. But I need you to understand that rebuilding trust is going to take time, and that my boundaries about financial assistance aren't going to change. I understand. I don't want your money, Chloe. I want my sister back. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment and realized something had fundamentally changed. For the first time in our adult relationship, Rebecca had approached me without an agenda that involved solving her problems. Maybe counseling was actually helping her develop insight into her behavior patterns. Maybe the broken engagement had forced her to confront some hard truths about her dependence on other people. Or maybe this was just another manipulation strategy, designed to restore access to family resources through emotional reconciliation. Either way, I was willing to find out. Because the boundaries I'd established weren't about cutting Rebecca off forever. They were about creating space for a healthier relationship to develop. A relationship where her emergencies didn't become my obligations. Where family loyalty wasn't measured by my willingness to sacrifice my resources for her convenience. Where I could love my sister without being used by her. If that relationship was possible, I wanted to explore it. And if it wasn't possible, I'd learned that I could have a peaceful, fulfilling life without constantly managing other people's crises. 2 weeks later, Rebecca and I met for coffee at a neutral location downtown. She looked different, more settled, less frantic. She'd gotten a haircut and was wearing clothes that fit properly instead of the constantly stressed appearance she'd maintained for years. "You look good," I said honestly. "I feel different. Clearer, I guess." We talked for an hour. Rebecca told me about her counseling sessions, her insights into her patterns of dependency, her plans for eventually moving out of our parents' house. She asked about my life, my work, my new apartment that she'd never seen. She didn't ask for money. She didn't create any crises that required my involvement. She didn't guilt-trip me about missing family events. For the first time in our adult relationship, we talked like two people who genuinely cared about each other, without either of us needing something from the other. It was exactly the kind of relationship I'd hoped might be possible if Rebecca ever learned to manage her own life. When we said goodbye, Rebecca hugged me and said, "Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I gave you every reason to." "I never gave up on you, Rebecca. I just gave up on being your solution to everything. I understand the difference now." As I drove home, I realized I'd learned something important about boundaries, family, and love. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's dysfunction. Sometimes protecting your own peace of mind creates space for healthier relationships to develop. Sometimes saying no to destructive patterns is the only way to say yes to genuine connection. I'd never been selfish for wanting basic boundaries and personal autonomy. I'd been smart to protect myself from being used, even when that protection was labeled as heartless by people who benefited from my sacrifice. The Morrison family was slowly learning new patterns of interaction, patterns based on mutual respect rather than automatic bailouts. Patterns where Rebecca's choices were her responsibility, where my parents' retirement wasn't constantly interrupted by artificial crises, where love was expressed through support rather than enabling. It was the family I'd always wanted but hadn't known how to create until I learned the power of a simple word: no. Rebecca had her own apartment now, a job she was good at, and relationships she maintained without financial manipulation. Jordan and Mia had consistent housing, stable school attendance, and a mother who was learning to solve problems instead of just creating them. Mom and Dad had their peaceful retirement back, their marriage restored, and their home reclaimed. And I had something I'd never had before: a life that belonged entirely to me, free from other people's emergencies and immune to guilt trips about family loyalty. Sometimes the most radical act of love is refusing to be used. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories about setting boundaries and choosing your own peace of mind. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for family is refuse to enable their worst impulses. I was never selfish. I just decided to stop being used.